The biting sting of her cousin's perfume fills Alice's nostrils as the Duke's hand tightens on her arm. 2 days until the wedding, a lifetime of gilded misery ahead. "Run!" a desperate voice whispers inside her head as he smiles, all teeth, a promise of loveless nights. Today she'll choose her own destiny. "Just a fortnight more," Alice whispered to her reflection, adjusting the lace collar of her afternoon dress. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the rich fabric. Every detail of her upcoming wedding to Duke Henry Olford had been meticulously planned over the past 6 months, from the exotic flower arrangements to the precise seating chart that would satisfy the complex hierarchy of London's aristocracy. She turned away from the mirror and walked to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens below. The Duke of Wolverton was considered the most eligible bachelor in London, handsome, wealthy, and of impeccable lineage. Their match had been celebrated throughout society, her father beaming with pride at securing such a prestigious connection for the Campbell family. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments like this, Alice wondered why Henry's gray eyes never seemed to truly see her. Their soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," Alice called, composing herself quickly. Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper who had served the Campbell family since before Alice's birth, stepped into the room. Her familiar presence brought Alice comfort during these days of mounting anticipation. "Lady Alice, your mother requests your presence in the east parlor. The seamstress has arrived for your final fitting." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Please inform Mother I shall be down momentarily." When Mrs. Wilson departed, Alice turned once more to the mirror, studying her reflection with a critical eye. She had been raised for this moment to make an advantageous match to elevate her family's already considerable standing. The Duke was everything she had been taught to desire in her husband. "This is everything you've been raised for," she reminded herself firmly. "Everything will be perfect." The fitting lasted longer than expected, with Alice's mother insisting on minute adjustments to the elaborate wedding gown. By the time she was released from the seamstress's attentions, Alice's nerves felt as tightly pinned as the dress's delicate lace. "I need some air," she murmured to herself, slipping away before her mother could engage her in yet another discussion about table arrangements or the guest list. The gardens behind Campbell Manor offered a temporary escape from the whirlwind of wedding preparations. Spring had coaxed the first roses into bloom, their sweet fragrance filling the air as Alice walked along the stone paths. She had always found solace among the flowers, away from the constant scrutiny of society. As she rounded a corner near the ornamental pond, voices drifted toward her from a secluded alcove, one distinctly belonging to her fiancé. Alice slowed her steps, a smile forming on her lips at the unexpected chance to see Henry. "You know my position is impossible," Henry's voice carried, tinged with frustration. "The Campbell fortune is necessary if I'm to restore Wolverton to its former glory." Alice froze, her hand clutching the cool stone of a nearby statue. "And what of us?" The second voice was unmistakably female, refined and heartbreakingly familiar. Her cousin, Lady Penelope Winthrop. "Patience, my love. Once we are married, Alice will be occupied with her charitable endeavors and social obligations. We shall have ample opportunity to continue as we always have." Alice's breath caught in her throat. She should walk away, pretend she had heard nothing, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground. "I cannot bear to see you wed to another, Henry, even if she is my own cousin. The marriage is merely a business arrangement. You alone hold my heart, Penelope." Unable to restrain herself, Alice stepped forward, rounding the hedge that had concealed them. The sight before her confirmed her worst fears, Henry holding Penelope in an intimate embrace, their lips having just parted from what was clearly a passionate kiss. "I see," Alice said, her voice unnaturally calm despite the violent trembling of her hands. "How convenient for you both." Henry released Penelope immediately, his face draining of color. "Alice, this is not what it appears. Is it not?" Alice raised an eyebrow, summoning every ounce of dignity she possessed. "It appears that my fiancé and my cousin have been engaged in a romantic affair behind my back. It appears that my impending marriage is nothing more than a financial transaction. Tell me, Henry, which part have I misunderstood?" Penelope at least had the decency to look ashamed, her cheeks flushing crimson as she averted her gaze. Alice, be reasonable. Henry stepped toward her, his voice lowered as though they were discussing something as trivial as the weather. Marriages in our circle are seldom about affection. They are alliances between families, consolidations of wealth and status. What Penelope and I share need not interfere with our arrangement. A cold clarity washed over Alice. All the small inconsistencies of the past months, Henry's occasional distraction, Penelope's overzealous interest in the wedding preparations, suddenly formed a complete picture. "You mistake me for a fool, Your Grace," Alice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our arrangement, as you call it, is terminated. I will not be made a mockery by becoming your Duchess, while you carry on with my own blood relation." "Don't be hasty," Henry's expression hardened, his charm giving way to calculation. "Think of the scandal, your family's reputation. Your father has already announced the match to everyone of consequence in England. How considerate of you to be concerned for my family's reputation while dishonoring me," Alice replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, despite the storm raging within. "Good day, Your Grace, cousin." With a formal curtsy that bordered on insolence, she turned and walked away, her back straight, despite the weight of betrayal crushing her heart. Behind her, she heard Penelope's frantic whispers and Henry's harsh commands to fix this mess. But Alice continued walking, each step carrying her further from the future she had so carefully planned. By the time she reached her chambers, Alice's composure had fractured. She dismissed her lady's maid with a choked request for privacy and sank to the floor beside her bed, finally allowing the tears to fall freely. Everything, the months of preparations, the expectations of society, her own modest dreams of companionship with a respected husband, had shattered in an instant. Yet beneath the pain and humiliation, a small, unfamiliar spark of defiance began to glow. For the first time in her life, Lady Alice Campbell contemplated the unthinkable, refusing to fulfill her duty as prescribed by her family and society. The wedding was in 2 days. Everyone who mattered in London would be in attendance. The scandal of calling it off would be enormous, but the alternative was unthinkable. As evening shadows lengthened across her room, Alice rose from the floor, dried her tears, and moved to her writing desk. Her hand trembled as she dipped her pen in ink, but her resolve had solidified into something cold and hard as diamond. She would not marry a man who valued her only for her fortune. She would not spend her life turning a blind eye to his indiscretions with her own cousin. She would not allow herself to be made a fool before all of society. But where could she go? Her parents would never support her decision to break the engagement. They would insist the wedding proceed regardless of Henry's betrayal. Alice needed an ally, someone of sufficient standing to offer protection, yet independent enough to defy convention. An image formed in her mind, a tall figure standing apart from the crowd at Lady Harrington's ball last season, observing the proceedings with thoughtful blue eyes. Lord Darcy Fisher, Earl of Dartmouth, a man known for his integrity and his disregard for society's more superficial dictates. They had conversed briefly on a few occasions, and though their acquaintance was limited, Alice had sensed in him a kindred spirit, someone who saw beyond the glittering facade of London's high society. "Dear Lord Darcy Fisher," she began, her penmanship unusually unsteady, "I find myself in need of counsel that only someone of your particular discretion and integrity might provide. A situation has arisen that makes it impossible for me to proceed with my marriage to the Duke of Wolverton. Yet I fear my family will insist upon the match regardless of my wishes. I seek temporary refuge while I determine my future course. If you would grant me an audience at your earliest convenience, I would be most grateful for your guidance in this difficult matter. Yours in desperate circumstance, Lady Alice Campbell." She sealed the letter with trembling fingers, then rang for a trusted servant who had been with her since childhood. "James, I need this delivered to Lord Darcy Fisher's London residence immediately. It is a matter of utmost urgency and must be placed directly into his lordship's hands." "Can I trust you with this task?" The elderly servant bowed. "Of course, Lady Alice. I shall see to it personally." As James departed with the letter, Alice turned to face the window. The sun was setting over London, casting a golden glow across the city's spires and rooftops. By this time tomorrow, she would either be on her way to sanctuary or trapped in a future she could no longer bear to contemplate. The choice had been made. Now she could only wait and hope that Lord Darcy would prove to be the honorable man she believed him to be. Dawn had barely broken when Alice received Lord Darcy's reply. The brevity of his response spoke volumes. Lady, Alice, you are welcome at Westcliff Hall in Dartmouth for as long as necessary. A carriage will await you at the White Horse Inn on Piccadilly at noon today. Bring only what you can carry without arousing suspicion. You have my word that you will find sanctuary here, Fisher. Relief coursed through her veins, followed swiftly by fear. To leave now so close to the wedding would create a scandal unlike anything London had seen in years. She would be condemned, ostracized, perhaps even disowned by her family. Yet the alternative to marry Henry, knowing what she now knew, was unthinkable. With shaking hands, Alice began to pack a small vow. With only the essentials, she wrote a brief note to her parents, explaining that she could not proceed with the marriage but providing no details of Henry's betrayal. They would learn the truth soon enough when Penelope's involvement became known, as it inevitably would. As the household stirred to life around her, Alice donned her plainest traveling dress and cloak. She waited until her mother left for a final consultation with the florist, then slipped down the servants' staircase and out through the kitchen gardens. The streets of London were beginning to bustle with morning activity as Alice made her way toward Piccadilly, her heart pounding with every step. By the time she reached the White Horse Inn, her nerves were stretched to breaking point, but the sight of a well-appointed carriage bearing Lord Darcy's crest steadied her resolve. The coachman helped her inside without question, securing her vow and immediately setting the horses in motion. As the carriage pulled away from London, Alice felt a curious mixture of terror and liberation wash over her. For the first time in her life, she had defied expectations. For the first time, she had chosen her own path. Whether that path would lead to ruin or redemption remained to be seen. The carriage rattled along the coastal road, each turn bringing Lady Alice Campbell further from London and the scandal she had left in her wake. 2 days had passed since she had fled Campbell Manor, with nothing but a small vow and the clothes on her back. 2 days since she had abandoned her own wedding, leaving a church full of England's most prominent aristocrats whispering behind gloved hands. The morning newspapers would be ablaze with speculation by now. Alice closed her eyes, imagining the headlines. Campbell heiress disappears on wedding day, or perhaps more scandalously, Duke of Wolverton left at the altar. What they wouldn't report, what only she, Henry, and Penelope knew was why. Alice gazed out at the passing countryside, watching as the rolling hills of inland England gradually gave way to the more dramatic landscapes of Devon. She had never traveled this far west before. Her world had been limited to London during the season, her family's country estate in Hampshire during the summer months, and occasional visits to other aristocratic homes for hunting parties or holiday celebrations. This journey represented more than mere physical distance. It was a departure from everything familiar, everything safe. With each mile, Alice felt both increasingly vulnerable and strangely liberated. "We're approaching Dartmouth, my lady," the driver called back, interrupting her thoughts. "We'll reach Westcliff Hall within the hour." Alice straightened her posture and adjusted her traveling cloak. She had never visited Lord Darcy Fisher's coastal estate, but had heard it described as one of the most breathtaking properties in Devon. The carriage rounded a bend, and suddenly the coastline spread before her, the afternoon sun glinting off the distant waters of the English Channel. The sight momentarily took her breath away. Unlike the gentle, manicured landscapes she was accustomed to, this coastline was wild and dramatic, towering cliffs dropping away to the churning sea below, the wind shaping the sparse trees into permanent bends. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the driver commented, noticing her reaction. "Many say there's nowhere in England quite like the Devon coast." "It's magnificent," Alice agreed softly. So different from the drawing rooms and ballrooms that had constituted her world until now. As the carriage continued along the coastal road, Alice caught her first glimpse of Westcliff Hall in the distance. Nestled on a cliff overlooking the sea stood a substantial gray stone manor house, less ostentatious than Campbell Manor or Henry's ancestral home, but possessing a quiet elegance that spoke of old money and refined taste. Its walls seemed to grow naturally from the rocky coastline, weathered yet strong against the elements. "The original structure dates back to Tudor times," the driver explained, following her gaze. Though most of what you see was built in the last century, his lordship has made many improvements since inheriting. As they drew nearer, Alice's anxiety returned in full force. She was about to become an uninvited guest in the home of a man she barely knew. Lord Darcy had responded to her desperate letter with surprising swiftness, offering his home as sanctuary without question or condition. Yet they were hardly more than acquaintances. The reserved Earl had always stood at the periphery of social gatherings, observing rather than participating in the elaborate dances of London society. What would he expect of her in return for his protection? Alice had always been taught that men of his station rarely acted without self-interest. Yet something in his brief note, the directness of his offer, the absence of flowery reassurances, had compelled her trust. The carriage turned up a long drive lined with ancient oaks, their branches creating a canopy overhead. As they emerged from this natural tunnel, Westcliff Hall stood before them in its full glory, impressive without being imposing, solid rather than showy. The carriage came to a stop, and a footman immediately appeared to assist her descent. Alice gathered her courage along with her skirts and stepped down, feeling the bracing coastal air fill her lungs. The wind was stronger here than in London, carrying the tang of salt and the distant cry of seabirds. Standing at the entrance was not a butler, as she had expected, but Lord Darcy himself. At 32, the Earl of Dartmouth cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that might be described as severe were it not for the warmth in his deep blue eyes. His dark hair slightly longer than fashion dictated, ruffled in the sea breeze. Lady Alice, he bowed formally, though there was nothing formal about the concern evident in his expression. You honor my home with your presence. Lord Darcy, Alice curtsied, suddenly acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance and the impropriety of her situation. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your hospitality, especially given the unusual circumstances. Something like a smile flickered across his face. I believe unusual circumstances may be the most diplomatic description of recent events I have yet heard. He offered his arm. Come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey. The entrance hall of Westcliff Hall was a study in understated elegance. Polished wood floors covered with faded Persian rugs, walls adorned with portraits of what Alice presumed were fisher ancestors, and tall windows that allowed the coastal light to illuminate every corner. How your home is beautiful, Alice said, meaning it. Where Campbell Manor and other London residences were designed to impress with their opulence, Westcliff Hall seemed created for comfort and practicality without sacrificing refinement. Thank you. It has been in my family for generations, though I confess I have made some adjustments to suit my own preferences since inheriting. Darcy gestured toward a wide staircase. Mrs. Winters, my housekeeper, has prepared chambers for you in the east wing. The views of the coastline are particularly fine from there. A middle-aged woman with a kind face appeared in the doorway, curtsying respectfully. Welcome to Westcliff Hall, Lady Alice. I'm Mrs. Winters. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms. Thank you, Alice replied, grateful for the woman's matter-of-fact manner, which betrayed no curiosity about her unexpected arrival. A maid named Rebecca has been assigned to attend you, Lord Darcy added. She's young, but quite capable. If you find her unsuitable for any reason, Mrs. Winters will make alternative arrangements. Alice was touched by his thoughtfulness. I'm sure she'll be perfectly adequate. I don't require elaborate attendance. Dinner will be served at 7, Lord Darcy informed her, but please do not feel obligated to join me if you require rest. I have instructed the staff to accommodate your needs, whatever they may be. Alice sensed the unspoken question beneath his courtesy. Why had she come to him of all people? They had crossed paths at numerous social functions over the years, exchanged pleasantries, perhaps shared a dance or two at the insistence of mutual acquaintances, but they were hardly confidants. I shall join you for dinner, my lord, she replied, and perhaps then I might explain my presumption in seeking your assistance. He nodded, the faintest smile again touching his lips. Until this evening, then, as she followed Mrs. Winters up the stairs. Alice wondered at Lord Darcy's calm acceptance of her presence. Most men of his position would have demanded immediate explanations, would have been concerned about the potential scandal of harboring a runaway bride. Yet he had asked no questions, had simply opened his home to her without condition. The chambers prepared for her exceeded any expectations. A spacious bedroom with a large four-poster bed draped in blue velvet opened onto a private sitting room, with windows that indeed offered spectacular views of the coastline. A dressing room and bathing chamber completed the suite. His lordship had these rooms refurbished last year, Mrs. Winters explained as she showed Alice around. They were originally intended for his mother when she visited, but the Dagger Countess found the sea air too bracing for her constitution. She prefers the west wing, which is more sheltered from the winds. They're lovely, Alice said sincerely. Far more than I could have hoped for. A bath has been prepared for you, Mrs. Winters continued, opening the door to the bathing chamber, where steam rose from a large copper tub. Rebecca will assist you, and then perhaps you might like to rest before dinner. The thought of a hot bath after 2 days of travel was so appealing that Alice nearly sighed with relief. That would be wonderful. Thank you. When Mrs. Winters departed, a young maid, presumably Rebecca, entered with an armful of fresh towels. She bobbed a curtsy, her expression curious but respectful. "Would you like assistance with your dress, my lady?" she asked. "Yes, please," Alice replied, turning to allow the girl access to the long row of buttons down her back. As Rebecca helped her undress and then soak in the fragrant bath, Alice found herself wondering again at the strange turn her life had taken. Just 3 days ago, she had been in London, surrounded by seamstresses and wedding planners, preparing to become a duchess. Now she was in a stranger's home on the Devon coast with nothing but a few hastily packed belongings and an uncertain future. Yet despite the precariousness of her position, Alice felt a curious sense of calm. For perhaps the first time in her life, she had made a decision based on her own judgment rather than the expectations of others. Whether that decision proved wise or foolish remained to be seen, but it had been hers alone. After the luxury of a bath and several hours' rest in a bedchamber that overlooked the dramatic coastline, Alice felt something close to herself again. She chose the simplest of the 3 dresses she had managed to pack, a deep blue evening gown with minimal embellishment, and allowed Rebecca to arrange her dark hair in a simple shiny. "You look lovely, my lady," Rebecca said as she secured the last pin. "That color suits you wonderfully." Alice studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow from the one who had stood in her London chambers just days ago. Perhaps it was merely the different lighting or the simplicity of her attire compared to the elaborate fashions she typically wore in society, or perhaps it was something in her expression, a new weariness in her eyes, but also a certain determination that hadn't been there before. When she descended to the dining room, she found Lord Darcy waiting, dressed in evening attire, but without the stiffness that characterized most aristocratic hosts. Something about him had always seemed slightly apart from society's rigid expectations, not in a scandalous way, but with a quiet confidence that allowed him to observe the rules without being constrained by them. "You look refreshed, Lady Alice," he said, pulling out her chair. "Your hospitality has been most restorative," she replied, settling into her seat. "Though I fear my presence here may bring unwanted attention to Westcliff Hall once my whereabouts become known." Lord Darcy took his own seat as servants began serving the first course. "I have never been overly concerned with society's attention, wanted or otherwise." They maintained polite conversation through the soup course, discussing the mild spring weather and the particular beauty of the Devon coastline. Alice learned that Lord Darcy had traveled extensively in his youth, studying at universities in Germany and Italy, before returning to England to assume his responsibilities as Earl following his father's death. "And you have never married?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "Forgive me, that was impertinent." But Lord Darcy seemed untroubled by her curiosity. "No apology necessary. And no, I have not married. I came close once in my 20s, but we ultimately determined we were ill-suited." "That must have been difficult," Alice said, thinking of her own broken engagement and the scandal it had caused. It was a mutual decision reached before any formal announcement. Much simpler that way. His gaze met hers briefly, and she understood his unspoken acknowledgement of her very different circumstances. It was only after the main course had been served and the servants had withdrawn that Lord Darcy addressed what must have been foremost in his mind. May I ask what precipitated your departure from London on what was to be your wedding day? His tone was gentle, without judgment. Alice set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. I discovered that the Duke of Wolverton's interest in our match was purely financial, she said carefully, and that his affections were engaged elsewhere. Lord Darcy's expression remained neutral, though she detected a tightening around his eyes. I see with my cousin, Lady Penelope Winthrop. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. I found them together the day before the wedding. Now a flash of genuine anger crossed his features. The man is a fool, he said simply. The bluntness of his assessment startled a small laugh from Alice. A wealthy, titled fool who now likely considers me the greatest disappointment of his life for depriving him of the Campbell fortune. And what does your family say of your decision? Alice looked down at her plate. I have not communicated with them since my departure. My father was most insistent that the match would proceed regardless of any indiscretions on the Duke's part. He believes that looking the other way at a husband's infidelities is simply part of a wife's duty. And you disagree. It wasn't a question, but Alice answered anyway. I would rather face social ruin than bind myself for life to a man who sees me as nothing more than a means to refurbish his estates while he carries on with my own cousin. Lord Darcy was silent for a moment, studying her with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable had there not been such genuine respect in his gaze. May I speak plainly, Lady Alice? She nodded, bracing herself. I have observed you at countless social functions over the years. You have always conducted yourself with grace and propriety, fulfilling every expectation placed upon you by your family and society. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Yet I have sometimes wondered if there might be more to Lady Alice Campbell than the perfect daughter of aristocracy, if perhaps behind that impeccable social mask existed a woman of deeper conviction and courage than most suspect. Alice felt her cheeks warm under his assessment. Until 2 days ago, I had never defied my parents in any significant matter. And yet, when faced with a fundamental betrayal of trust, you chose integrity over convenience and appearances. That requires no small amount of courage. A footman entered with the dessert course and they paused their conversation until they were alone again. You still have not explained why you sought refuge here specifically, Lord Darcy said finally, his tone curious rather than accusatory. Alice hesitated. How could she explain what she herself did not fully understand? That despite their limited interactions, she had always sensed in Lord Darcy a kindred spirit, someone who observed the world with the same quiet contemplation she practiced in her private moments. You once defended my cousin Elenina when she broke her engagement to Lord Whitcomb after discovering his gambling debts, Alice said, when everyone else condemned her for embarrassing a man of his standing. You publicly stated that she had shown good judgment rather than capriciousness. Lord Darcy nodded slowly. I remember. You have a reputation for fairness and discretion, my lord. And I had nowhere else to turn where I would not be immediately sent back to London in disgrace. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. You may remain at Westcliff Hall for as long as necessary, Lady Alice. You have my word that you will find sanctuary here. Thank you, she whispered, overcome with relief and gratitude. Later, as they took tea in the drawing room, Lord Darcy spoke of his life in Dartmouth, so different from the constant social obligations of London. He described his work improving conditions in the local village, his studies of marine life along the coast, his collection of books that filled the magnificent library on the east wing of the house. The library was my grandfather's passion, he explained. He spent decades acquiring volumes on every subject imaginable. I've continued his work, though my interests tend more toward natural sciences and philosophy than his preference for history and classical literature. I would love to see it, Alice said, genuinely interested. My own education was rather limited. The typical accomplishments expected of young ladies, music, drawing, French, a smattering of literature, nothing that might make me too intellectual for marriage prospects. The corner of Darcy's mouth lifted slightly. The library is at your disposal, Lady Alice, as is my guidance, should you wish to explore subjects beyond the usual feminine curriculum. As the evening progressed, Alice felt the iron bands of anxiety that had constricted her chest since fleeing London begin to loosen. For the first time in days, perhaps longer, she could breathe freely. "If I may ask," she ventured as the clock struck 10, "what will you tell people about my presence here? Surely questions will arise." Lord Darcy considered this. "For now only that you are recuperating from a period of ill health and that the sea air was recommended for your recovery. It's a common enough reason for retreat from society and not entirely untrue. The soul can be ill as well as the body." Alice nodded, grateful for his thoughtfulness. "And your staff, what do they know?" "Only Mrs. Winters and my valet are aware of your true identity. The rest have been told you are a distant relation in need of quiet and recovery. My household is loyal and discreet." "You seem to have thought of everything," Alice observed. "Not everything, I'm sure," he replied with a small smile, "but enough to ensure your peace while you determine your next steps." When she finally retired to her chambers, exhaustion overtook her, but it was a different sort than she had experienced in London. There she had been worn down by expectations and appearances. Here, despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt the curious lightness that comes with honoring one's own truth, whatever the cost. Outside her window, the moonlight cast a silver path across the dark waters of the channel. Alice stood watching the rhythmic movement of the waves against the cliffs below, thinking of Lord Darcy's words, "A woman of deeper conviction and courage than most suspect." Perhaps she was only now discovering whether that assessment was accurate. She had taken the first step by refusing to proceed with a marriage based on deception. What would the next step be? Return to London and face the scandal, seek reconciliation with her family, or perhaps forge a new path entirely? For the first time in her life, the answer wasn't prescribed by society or family expectations. The choice would be hers alone. As she slipped into bed, the sound of the distant waves lulling her towards sleep, Alice realized that the panic and shame she had anticipated feeling had not materialized. Instead, there was a strange sense of possibility, as though in losing the future she had been raised to expect, she had gained the opportunity to discover a life of her own choosing. Whether that opportunity would lead to happiness or heartbreak remained to be seen. But for tonight in the sanctuary of Westcliff Hall, with the unexpected alliance of a man who seemed to see her more clearly than anyone ever had, Alice allowed herself to hope. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains of Alice's bedchamber at Westcliff Hall, she woke to the sound of seabirds calling along the cliffs. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night when she had first arrived, exhausted and uncertain at Lord Darcy's doorstep. 3 weeks since she had chosen the path of integrity over convention, fleeing a marriage built on deception. With each passing day, the weight of scandal that had initially threatened to crush her spirit had gradually lightened. From the safe distance of Dartmouth, the whispers and condemnations of London society lost their power to wound. In their place, Alice discovered something unexpected, a growing sense of her own strength and the quiet contentment that comes from living in accordance with one's true nature. Her parents had written several increasingly desperate letters, first demanding she return to London immediately, then pleading with her to reconsider the match with Henry. "The Duke is willing to overlook your impetuous behavior," her father had written, as though her flight had been nothing more than a childish tantrum rather than a response to betrayal. Alice had responded courteously but firmly, explaining her reasons without revealing the full extent of Henry and Penelope's deception. It would serve no purpose to create further enmity between the families, particularly when Penelope's parents were innocent of any wrongdoing. To her surprise, it was her younger sister Catherine who showed the most understanding. "I always thought the Duke looked at you as though appraising a particularly valuable painting rather than a future wife," she had written. "And Penelope has been insufferably smug this past year. I begin to understand why." This morning, as Alice dressed in a simple day gown, far less elaborate than anything she would have worn in London, she reflected on how completely her daily rhythms had changed. The life she led now at Westcliff Hall bore little resemblance to her existence in London, with its rigid schedules of social calls, fittings, and society events. Lord Darcy, who had gently insisted she call him simply Darcy after the first week, kept no rigid social schedule. He rose early to work on estate matters, often rode along the coastal paths in the afternoons, and spent evenings in his library, or increasingly in conversation with Alice. She had begun to join him for these morning rides, discovering in herself an affinity for horsemanship that had been suppressed by London's more restrictive ideas about appropriate feminine activities. On her first ride, Darcy had offered her a side saddle, but upon seeing her hesitation, had suggested an alternative. "My mother always preferred riding astride when away from judgmental eyes," he had said, a mischievous glint in his usually serious gaze. "I keep a suitable habit in the stables for when she visits, though she rarely does so now, preferring the comfort of Bath to our wild coastline." That first ride along the cliffs, feeling the power of the horse beneath her and the wind in her hair, had been a revelation. Like so many things at Westcliff Hall, it represented a freedom Alice had never known she craved until it was offered. Now, as she made her way down to breakfast, Alice found Darcy already at the table, reading correspondence while enjoying his morning coffee. He rose when she entered, a courtesy he never neglected, despite the growing informality between them. "Good morning," he greeted her, his smile warming features that many in London society found intimidating in their severity. "I hope you rested well." "Very well, thank you," Alice replied, taking her seat as a footman poured her tea. "Though I confess I'm eager for our planned visit to the village today, I finished the books for the lending library catalogue and would like to deliver them to Mr. Patterson." Darcy nodded, pleased when he had mentioned his project to establish a lending library for the village. Alice had immediately offered her assistance, applying the organizational skills previously devoted to seating charts and guest lists to something of more substantial value. "Patterson will be delighted," Darcy said. "He mentioned yesterday that several of the fishermen's children have already expressed interest in borrowing books once the library opens." Their conversation continued easily through breakfast, discussing the day's plans and local matters. Alice marveled at how comfortable this had become, this sharing of thoughts and ideas with a man who treated her as an intellectual equal rather than an ornamental accessory. "There's a letter for you," Darcy mentioned, passing a sealed envelope across the table. "From London, I believe." Alice recognized her sister, Catherine's handwriting, and opened it eagerly. As she read, her expression grew troubled. "Is something amiss?" Darcy asked, his concern evident. "Catherine writes that Henry has been spreading his own version of events throughout London," Alice explained, her voice tight. "He claims I suffered some sort of nervous collapse brought on by wedding anxiety, and that he has been most patient and understanding about my fragile mental state." Darcy's expression darkened. The man's arrogance is boundless. To betray you and then presume to control the narrative of your departure. He also apparently hints that he expects me to return once I've regained my senses. Alice continued, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. "Catherine says there are already wages being placed in the gentlemen's clubs. About how long before I come crawling back to beg his forgiveness?" "And your reputation in all this?" Darcy asked quietly. "Damaged, of course, but salvageable, provided I return contrite and accept Henry's magnanimous forgiveness." Alice folded the letter carefully. "Catherine says our mother has taken to her bed with migraines, and our father alternates between rage and diplomatic efforts to minimize the scandal." Darcy was silent for a moment, studying her face. "And how does this news affect your own thoughts about your future?" It was a direct question, typical of his straightforward manner. In the weeks since her arrival, Darcy had never pressed her about her plans, offering instead the gift of time and space to determine her own mind. "I find myself surprisingly unmoved by it all," Alice admitted, somewhat astonished at her own reaction. "A month ago, the thought of being the subject of such gossip would have horrified me." Now she shrugged slightly. "I cannot bring myself to care what people who have never truly known me might think." A smile of approval crossed Darcy's face. "Freedom often begins when we cease to be governed by others' opinions. Is that why you've always seemed so comfortably apart from society's more ridiculous conventions?" Alice asked, curious about the man who had become both her protector and increasingly her friend. "Partly," he acknowledged, "though I've had the advantage of being a man of independent means. Society allows men far more latitude for eccentricity than it does women." "A profound injustice," Alice remarked. "Indeed," Darcy set down his coffee cup. "Shall we prepare for our village visit? If we leave within the hour, We can be present when the new schoolhouse roof is completed. I've promised the children they might place small mementos in the roof beam for posterity." Alice smiled, her concerns about London gossip already receding in the face of more meaningful endeavors. "A wonderful idea. I'll fetch my bonnet and meet you at the stables." The village of Dartmouth nestled between the hills and the harbor, its narrow streets lined with buildings of stone and timber that spoke of centuries of seafaring history. As Alice and Darcy walked from the schoolhouse toward the harbor, they made an incongruous pair, the Earl in his simple but immaculately tailored country attire, and the daughter of aristocracy in a dress far less elaborate than anything she would have worn in London. Yet Alice had come to love these walks through the village, where Darcy greeted each person by name and showed genuine interest in their lives. Today they had watched as the final beams of the new schoolhouse roof were secured, with each child allowed to place a small token, a marble, a pressed flower, a carefully written note into a hollow carved in the central beam. "You've done something remarkable here," she said as they left the building. "This school will change many lives." Darcy shrugged, though she could see he was pleased by her observation. Education is the greatest gift one can offer. Knowledge once gained cannot be taken away. They continued their walk through the village, stopping occasionally to speak with shopkeepers or to admire the boats in the harbor. Alice found herself fascinated by Darcy's easy manner with people of all stations, so different from the rigid class consciousness that dominated London society. "You seem very at home here," she remarked as they paused to watch fishermen unloading their day's catch. "More so than in London drawing rooms." Darcy smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious countenance. "Is it that obvious? I have always found the country more conducive to sincerity. In London, one must constantly navigate currents of gossip and intrigue that have little to do with a person's true character. And yet you maintain your London residence and attend the season each year." "Duty," he said simply. "My position requires certain appearances be maintained, however tedious I might find them." Alice nodded, understanding all too well the weight of such obligations. They continued walking in comfortable silence until they reached the edge of the harbor, where the view opened to the wider channel beyond. "May I ask you something rather personal, Lady Alice?" Darcy said suddenly. She turned to face him, surprised by the formal address after weeks of growing familiarity. "Of course, had you not discovered the Duke's betrayal, would you have been content in that match?" The question caught her off guard. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the past weeks, examining her feelings with a new honesty. "I believed I would be," she said slowly, "not ecstatically happy perhaps, but content in fulfilling my duty in securing a respectable position. The Duke was considered an excellent match by every conventional measure, but not by measures that matter to your heart," Darcy observed quietly. Alice felt a flush rise to her cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct conversation about matters of the heart. "I was raised to believe that marriages in our circle are primarily alliances of family and fortune. Affection might develop over time, but it was never the primary consideration. And now, has your perspective changed?" She considered the question carefully. "I think perhaps it was changing even before I discovered Henry's betrayal. There were moments when I would look at him and feel nothing, no spark of connection, no sense that he truly saw me as I am rather than as the as he required." Darcy's eyes held hers intense and searching. "And what is it that you truly want? Palace beyond the expectations of family and society?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had yet dared to name aloud. Before she could answer, a voice called out from behind them. "Lady Alice Campbell, by heavens, it really is you." Alice turned, startled to hear her full name spoken in this place where she had begun to feel anonymous. Walking rapidly toward them was Sir William Blackwood, an acquaintance from London society, whose family kept a summer home somewhere along the Devon coast. "Sir William," she acknowledged with a stiff nod, acutely aware of how quickly her carefully constructed sanctuary might now crumble. "Everyone has been in absolute confusion over your disappearance," he said, eyes alike with the excitement of one who has stumbled upon valuable gossip. "And to find you here in Dartmouth in the company of Lord Fisher? How extraordinary." Darcy stepped forward slightly, his posture protective, without being possessive. "Lady Alice has been recovering from a period of ill health as my guest," he said smoothly. "The sea has proven most beneficial." Sir William's eyes darted between them, clearly calculating the social implications of Alice's presence. Indeed, how fortunate that she found such a dedicated host. The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Alice felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Within days, word would reach London that she had fled to Lord Darcy's estate. Whatever remained of her reputation would be in tatters. Sir William. Darcy's voice had taken on an edge Alice had never heard before. "Lady Alice's presence here is above reproach. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, serves as her companion, and every propriety has been observed." Of course," Sir William backpedaled, though the gleam in his eye suggested the damage was already done. "I meant no disrespect. I merely thought her family would be relieved to know of her whereabouts and good health." "My family has been fully informed of my location," Alice said, finding her voice at last. "I would appreciate your discretion in this matter, Sir William." He bowed a touch too deeply. "Naturally, Lady Alice, your privacy is of the utmost concern." The words rang hollow and all three knew it. After a few more minutes of uncomfortable pleasantries, Sir William took his leave, and Alice and Darcy began the walk back to where their carriage waited. "I apologize," Alice said quietly. "I have compromised your reputation as well as my own." Darcy's expression was thoughtful rather than concerned. "My reputation has never been of particular interest to me, but I am concerned for you. Sir William is not known for his discretion." "No," Alice agreed. "By this time tomorrow, half of London will likely have heard some version of our encounter." They reached the carriage in silence, each lost in private contemplation. As they traveled the coastal road back to Westcliff Hall, the beauty of the scenery that had so enchanted Alice these past weeks seemed dimmed by the shadow of impending scandal. "There is a solution," Darcy said suddenly, breaking the long silence. "If you would consider it." Alice turned to him, curious. "What solution?" Darcy's gaze was steady, though she detected an unusual tension in his posture. "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. "I don't understand," Alice stammered, though part of her did understand all too well. "If we were to announce our engagement immediately before Sir William's gossip reaches London, it would explain your presence here in a way that society would accept, even applaud." Darcy's voice was practical, but his eyes held something deeper. The narrative becomes not one of a runaway bride seeking refuge, but of a woman who broke an engagement because her heart belonged elsewhere. Alice's pulse quickened. "You would offer marriage simply to protect my reputation." "No," Darcy said quietly. "Not simply for that." The carriage turned onto the drive leading to Westcliff Hall, and Alice could see the great house rising before them, solid and steadfast against the darkening sky. Something about its quiet strength reminded her of the man sitting across from her, a man who had offered her sanctuary without question, who had seen her as she truly was, rather than as the perfect society daughter she had pretended to be for so long. Then why, she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer, and feared even more the feelings it stirred within her. Darcy's gaze never wavered. "Because I have admired you from afar for years, Alice, not for your family name or fortune, but for the glimpses of your true self I've caught in unguarded moments. Your kindness to those others overlook, your quiet wit, the way you lose yourself in music when you think no one is watching." Alice felt as though the air had been drawn from her lungs. "You noticed all that?" "I notice everything about you," he said simply. "I always have." The carriage came to a stop before the main entrance, but neither moved to disembark. "This is not how I would have chosen to declare myself," Darcy continued. "I would have courted you properly, given you time to know your own heart without pressure or scandal forcing your hand. But circumstances being what they are," he paused, then reached across to take her hand gently in his. "I am offering not just a solution to your current predicament, Alice, but a life together based on mutual respect and affection. Perhaps not the grand passion of novels, but something real and enduring." Alice looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. In London, she had been prepared to marry a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. Here was a man offering something far more valuable, a partnership of equals founded on genuine regard. And yet you deserve someone who comes to you freely, Darcy, not someone pushed to your door by scandal and necessity. A small smile touched his lips. Do you imagine I would have offered if I believed your acceptance would be merely practical? I have observed you these past weeks, Alice. I have seen how you've blossomed away from the constraints of London society. I believe there is something growing between us that given time could become profound. Before she could respond, the carriage door opened and a footman appeared to assist their descent. The moment of intimacy was broken, but the weight of Darcy's words remained. Think on it, he said quietly as they walked toward the house. There is no need for an immediate answer. But as they entered Westcliff Hall, a commotion in the entrance hall made it clear that time for careful consideration might be a luxury they no longer possessed. Standing in the center of the marble floor, his traveling clothes immaculate despite the long journey, was Henry Alford, Duke of Wolverton. "Our Lady Alice," he said, his handsome face set in lines of determination. "I have come to bring you home." The entrance hall of Westcliff Hall had never seemed so cavernous to Alice as it did in that moment, with Henry's unexpected appearance creating a tableau that seemed frozen in time. Darcy beside her, tension evident in the set of his shoulders, Henry standing before them with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. And between them, Alice herself, no longer the pliable society daughter, but a woman who had begun to recognize her own worth. The air itself seemed charged with the collision of two worlds, her past in London society with all its gilded constraints, and her present at Westcliff Hall with its newfound freedom. The clock in the corner ticked loudly in the strained silence, each second marking the distance between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. "Your Grace," she said coolly, deliberately using his title rather than his given name. "This is an unexpected visit." Henry's smile did not reach his eyes. "When I received word of your whereabouts, I felt it my duty to escort you back to London without delay. Your family is most concerned." "Is that so?" Alice raised an eyebrow. "Strange as I have been in regular correspondence with them these past weeks." Darcy stepped forward slightly. "Duke Alfred, while your concern is noted, Lady Alice is a guest in my home and will remain so for as long as she wishes." Henry's gaze flicked to Darcy, dismissive and calculating. "Lord Fisher, how charitable of you to offer sanctuary to a young woman in distress. One might almost question the propriety of such an arrangement." "One might," Darcy agreed, his voice dangerously calm. If one were looking for scandal rather than truth, a tense silence fell over the hall. Alice could feel the growing animosity between the two men and knew she must take control of the situation before it escalated further. "Your Grace," she said, stepping forward, "you have made a long journey. Perhaps you would care for refreshment before we continue this discussion." Henry looked momentarily wrong-footed by her composure. He had clearly expected tears, please, or at the very least, embarrassment at being discovered. Alice felt a small surge of satisfaction at his confusion. "That would be acceptable," he conceded. Darcy gave instructions to the butler, and soon they were seated in the drawing room, an uncomfortable triangle with tea and cakes that no one touched. "I understand you were seen in the village today," Henry said, directing his words to Alice, while pointedly ignoring Darcy. "By tomorrow, all of London will know where you've been hiding these past weeks. Your reputation will be irreparably damaged." "My reputation was of little concern to you when you were kissing my cousin in our garden," Alice replied evenly. Henry had the grace to flush slightly. A momentary indiscretion, nothing more. Hardly worth destroying an advantageous match over. "Advantageous for whom precisely?" Alice asked. "For you, certainly, with access to my fortune to restore your estates, for my family, perhaps with the prestige of a ducal connection. But what advantage was there for me in a husband who saw me as nothing more than a convenient heirs?" Henry's expression hardened. "This is not the behavior of the Lady Alice Campbell I knew in London. Perhaps you never truly knew me at all," she countered. "Regardless," Henry pressed on, "the fact remains that your presence here, unchaperoned in the home of a bachelor, has created a situation that can only be resolved by your immediate return to London." Alice felt Darcy tense beside her. Before he could speak, however, there was a commotion in the hallway, and the butler appeared at the door. "My lord, I apologize for the interruption, but Lady Penelope Winthrey has arrived and insists on seeing the Duke immediately." Alice watched as Henry's composure cracked for the first time. "Penelope is here," he hissed. "Tell her to wait in the carriage," but it was too late. Penelope swept into the room, her traveling costume immaculate despite the journey, her fair beauty a striking contrast to Alice's darker coloring. She stopped short at the sight of the three of them arranged in their uncomfortable tableau. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you promised you would simply speak with Alice and return directly. You said nothing about staying here yourself." The pieces fell into place in Alice's mind with sudden clarity. "You've been continuing your affair," she said, looking between Henry and Penelope. "All this time, while society condemned me for leaving you at the altar, you two have been together." Penelope at least had the decency to look ashamed. "It wasn't. We didn't plan." "Oh, spare me the protestations of innocence," Alice said, surprising herself with her forthright tone. "What I cannot understand is why you've come all this way to retrieve me, Henry, when you clearly have no genuine desire for our marriage." Henry's jaw tightened. "The Campbell fortune is still necessary for Wolverton's restoration. My personal feelings are irrelevant." "And what of Lady Penelope's feelings?" Darcy interjected, his voice quiet but firm. "Do you intend to continue your relationship with her after marrying Lady Alice?" "My arrangements are none of your concern, Lord Fisher," Henry snapped. "They became my concern when Lady Alice sought refuge in my home," Darcy replied. "And they are most certainly her concern as the woman you still apparently intend to make your Duchess." Alice looked at her cousin, seeing beyond her beauty to the vulnerability beneath. Penelope had always been the fragile one, easily influenced, desperate for affection after losing both parents at a young age. "Penelope," she said gently, "does Henry love you?" Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "He says he does, and yet he came here to reclaim me as his bride," Alice pointed out, "for my fortune, by his own admission." A flicker of doubt crossed Penelope's lovely face. "He said it was necessary, that once the estates were restored, we could be together properly as his mistress, while I played the role of Duchess," Alice concluded. "Is that truly what you want? To forever be the woman in the shadows?" The tears spilled over onto Penelope's cheeks. I thought there was no other way. He said you would understand that aristocratic marriages were always like this." "Some are," Alice agreed, thinking of countless loveless matches she had observed in London society. "But they needn't be." Henry rose abruptly. "Enough of this nonsense. Lady Alice, gather your belongings. We return to London tonight. The banns will be read again, and the wedding will proceed as originally planned." "No," Alice said, the single word resonating in the room with quiet finality. Henry stared at her in disbelief. "I beg your pardon." "I said no, Henry. I will not marry you. Not tomorrow. Not ever. You would rather face complete social ruin." He laughed incredulously. "No one else will have you after this scandal." "That is where you are mistaken," Darcy said, rising to stand beside Alice. His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering as he faced the Duke. "Lady Alice has already accepted my proposal of marriage." Alice felt her heart skip at his words. Though they had discussed the possibility mere minutes ago, she had given no formal acceptance. Yet in that moment, looking at Darcy's resolute profile, she knew with sudden clarity that this was indeed what she wanted. Henry's face contorted with disbelief. "This is absurd. You expect me to believe that in the span of a few weeks you've developed an attachment to Lord Fisher strong enough to justify marriage?" "I have come to know Lord Fisher better in these weeks than I knew you in a year of courtship," Alice replied. "He has shown me kindness without ulterior motive, respect without condition, and affection without demand." Penelope looked between them, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning hope. You truly wish to marry Lord Fisher?" Alice turned to face Darcy, finding in his steady blue eyes all the reassurance she needed. "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of a vow. "I do." Something shifted in Penelope's countenance, a release of tension as though a burden had been lifted. "Then I wish you joy," she said quietly. Henry rounded on her. Penelope, you cannot be serious. This changes nothing between us, doesn't it? She asked, a new strength in her voice. You came here to reclaim Alice for her fortune, willing to set me aside despite your promises. What guarantee have I that you wouldn't discard me just as easily once you had secured the Campbell wealth? For the first time, Henry appeared truly flustered. That's entirely different. You know, my feelings for you are genuine. Do I? Penelope's chin lifted slightly. I begin to wonder if I've been as much a fool as you believed Alice to be. Alice felt a surge of pride for her cousin. Perhaps there was more strength in Penelope than anyone had given her credit for, herself included. This is preposterous, Henry sputtered, looking between the three of them. A conspiracy to humiliate me. Not everything revolves around you, Henry, Alice said calmly. This is simply the natural consequence of your own actions. The Duke's face flushed with anger. You will regret this defiance, Alice. Both of you will. He gestured between Alice and Darcy. Society will never accept this hasty arrangement. They will see it for what it is, a desperate attempt to salvage a ruined reputation. Perhaps some will, Darcy acknowledged, but those whose opinions truly matter will recognize the truth. Henry gave a dismissive snort. And what truth is that? Darcy's gaze shifted to Alice, and the tenderness in his expression made her breath catch. That Lady Alice deserves a husband who values her for more than her doughy, who sees the strength of character behind her quiet demeanor, who admires her courage in choosing integrity over convenience. In that moment, with Darcy's words surrounding her like a shield, Alice realized that the admiration he described had been growing within her as well. Admiration for his quiet dignity, his unwavering principles, his kindness to those society often overlooked. Perhaps what had begun as refuge could indeed blossom into something deeper and more lasting. Henry looked between them, his calculation almost visible behind his eyes. Finally, with a curt nod, he reached for his hat and gloves. It seems my journey has been wasted. Lady Penelope, shall we return to London? Penelope hesitated, glancing at Alice. I believe I shall remain here for a time, if Lady Alice and Lord Fisher will permit it. My companion is in the carriage, so all proprieties can be observed. Henry's jaw tightened. As you wish. With a stiff bow to the company, he turned and strode from the room, his footsteps echoing across the marble hall. After the front door closed behind him, the three remaining occupants of the drawing room stood in silence for a long moment. Well, Penelope said finally, attempting a weak smile, that was rather dramatic. Alice crossed to her cousin and took her hands. Are you certain you wish to stay? You are welcome, of course, but you wonder if my heart is truly free of Henry, Penelope finished for her. She sighed. Not entirely, perhaps, but I believe it may be time I learned to value myself as more than an accessory to a man's life, however titled he may be. She squeezed Alice's hands. You have shown me that it is possible to choose one's own path, even when society dictates otherwise. Darcy cleared his throat gently. I shall have rooms prepared for Lady Penelope and her companion immediately. As he moved to leave, Alice touched his arm. Darcy, a moment, please. When they were alone in the corridor, she looked up at him, suddenly shy, despite the boldness she had displayed moments before. Did you mean it? Your proposal? His expression softened. Every word, though I had hoped for a more romantic setting than a confrontation with your former fiancé. Alice smiled. I believe I prefer honesty in difficult moments to romance in easy ones. Then let me be honest now, Darcy said, taking her hands in his. I have admired you from afar for years, Alice, but these weeks at Westcliff Hall have transformed admiration into something deeper. I find myself thinking of you first upon waking and last before sleeping. Your courage in defying convention has only strengthened my regard. He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. I offer you not just my name and protection, but my heart, flawed as it may be. Alice felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of a different sort than those she had shed in London. Tears of recognition, of finding something precious that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered. I accept, she whispered, not out of necessity or gratitude, though I am indeed grateful. I accept because in you I have found someone who sees me truly, not as the perfect society daughter I pretended to be, but as the woman I am becoming." Darcy raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her heart flutter. "Then we shall discover together who we may become when freed from society's narrowest constraints." The announcement of the engagement of Lady Alice Campbell to Darcy Fisher, Earl of Dartmouth, was met with precisely the explosion of gossip and speculation that both had anticipated. The London papers could speak of little else for a fortnight, with theories ranging from the romantic to the scandalous. Alice's parents, after an initial period of shock and dismay, came to accept the match with something approaching enthusiasm once they had visited Westcliff Hall and observed the obvious affection between their daughter and Lord Darcy. The Earl's fortune, while not as vast as the Duke's, was substantial, and more importantly, free of the encumbrances that had driven Henry's desperate pursuit of the Campbell wealth. Lady Penelope remained at Westcliff Hall for a month, her presence serving both as propriety's requirement and as a period of healing for the cousins. By the time she returned to London, their relationship had been mended, and Penelope had developed a new resolve to make choices based on her own happiness rather than others' expectations. As for the Duke of Wolverton, he retreated to his country estate, where rumors suggested he was entertaining a succession of wealthy American heiresses, each a potential solution to his financial troubles. Alice found she could think of him now with more pity than anger, a man so focused on appearances and position that he had never learned to recognize true worth. The wedding took place in early autumn at the small stone church in Dartmouth Village, with sunlight streaming through ancient stained glass windows, and the sound of the sea providing a gentle backdrop to the vows. Alice wore a gown of ivory silk, simpler than the elaborate creation that had been prepared for her London wedding, but infinitely more suited to the woman she had become. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her gaze locked with Darcy's, she felt none of the anxiety or doubt that had plagued her before her aborted wedding to Henry. Instead, each step carried her closer to a future built on mutual respect and growing affection, a foundation far stronger than social expectation or financial necessity. "You look radiant," Darcy whispered as she reached his side. "I feel it," she replied truthfully. For perhaps the first time, when they spoke their vows, the words carried the weight of genuine promise rather than social obligation. And when Darcy kissed her for the first time as husband and wife, Alice knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a refuge from a bad match, but a true partner for whatever life might bring. The reception was held on the lawns of Westcliff Hall, with the spectacular coastal views serving as nature's own decoration. Alice's sister, Catherine, who had supported her decision from the beginning, whispered in her ear as they embraced, "I have never seen you look so at peace." "Is that what this feeling is?" Alice smiled. "I had thought it might be happiness." "Perhaps they are one and the same," Catherine suggested. Later, as the celebration continued into evening, Alice found a moment of quiet with Darcy on the terrace overlooking the sea. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked, his arm warm around her waist. Alice considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "Only that I didn't have the courage to seek my own happiness sooner. I might have saved everyone considerable drama." Darcy chuckled. "I confess I cannot regret the path that led you to Westcliff Hall, however circuitous it may have been." "Nor can I in truth," Alice admitted. "Sometimes the longest road leads to the most worthwhile destination." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, Darcy turned to face her fully. "I made you a promise when I proposed that what grows between us could become profound. I intend to spend our lifetime ensuring that promise is kept." Alice reached up to touch his cheek, no longer shy in her affection. "And I promise to continue discovering who I truly am beyond the constraints of society's expectations." "I believe you may find you've married a more interesting woman than you realized." "I am counting on it," Darcy replied, his smile warming his usually serious features. "After all, it was the glimpses of your true self that first captured my heart." As they rejoined their guests, Alice caught sight of her cousin Penelope, deep in conversation with Darcy's friend, Lord James Harrington, her expression more animated than Alice had seen in months. Nearby, Catherine was charming the local gentry with her natural wit, while Alice's parents had apparently found common ground with Darcy's aunt, a formidable dagger with progressive ideas about women's education. These were the beginnings of a new chapter, not just for Alice and Darcy, but for all whose lives had been touched by the events set in motion that spring day in London, when Alice had discovered a betrayal that in the end had led her to a far greater happiness than she had ever dared imagine. Later that night, as she stood in the moonlit bedchamber that would now be theirs, Alice felt Darcy's arms encircle her from behind. "Welcome home, Lady Fisher," he murmured against her hair. Alice turned in his embrace, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence. "Home," she repeated, "not because of these walls or this land, magnificent as they are. No," she shook her head, smiling up at him. "Home because I have found where I truly belong, with someone who sees me as I am and values what he sees." As Darcy lowered his lips to hers, Alice knew that their story was just beginning. A story built not on the glittering foundations of London society, but on the solid bedrock of mutual respect, growing affection, and the courage to choose one's own path, whatever the cost. In the end, it had cost her a duke, but gained her an earl, and more importantly, a chance at genuine happiness. It was, Alice reflected, as she returned her husband's kiss with newfound passion, the most advantageous match she could possibly have made. Dear listener, as we conclude this journey with Lady Alice Campbell, I hope you have found not merely entertainment, but a reflection of truths that transcend time and circumstance. In the London of 1887 or in the cities of today, the courage to follow one's heart rarely comes without consequences. Like Alice, many of us face moments when the expected path is not the right one. Perhaps you have lived through your own version of this crossroads, a marriage that did not bring happiness, relationships that needed reassessment, or social expectations that stifled your true desires. What Alice's story teaches us is that it is never too late to choose authenticity. At 60, 70, or 80 years of age, we remain the authors of our own narrative. We can still, like Alice, discover parts of ourselves that have lain dormant beneath the weight of convention. Take with you tonight the certainty that true security comes not from yielding to external pressures, but from honoring the inner wisdom you have cultivated over decades. Like the solid Westcliff Hall facing the storms of the sea, you possess the strength to withstand life's uncertainties. As you rest your head upon your pillow tonight, allow yourself to feel the same peace that Alice found, not from having all the answers, but from having the courage to ask the right questions. As she discovered with Darcy, sometimes the most meaningful relationships are those based not on appearances, but on a deep recognition of who we truly are. May your sleep be deep and restorative, sheltered by the knowledge that your journey with all its unexpected turns holds value and purpose. And may you awaken carrying the quiet assurance that, like Alice, you possess the strength to rewrite any chapter of your story that does not resonate with your heart. With profound gratitude for sharing this moment with us. Legends of the Fall. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel, liking the video, and sharing it with others who love emotional, redemptive, historical romances. Your support truly helps us keep telling stories that matter. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. And don't forget, at the end of this video, another beautiful story awaits. Click and be surprised by more unforgettable tales just like this one.